program today is Business and Professional Women's Organization, BPW. And I guess I just want to recognize people in the audience that have a connection to the club. Raise your hand if you were a member. So we have Connie Francis. I guess it's the only, besides myself, the only member here today. And then raise your hand if you have like an association with a member. I know we have Angie Schwenker, and her grandma, Leona Brock, was a longtime member. And Marilyn, your mother-in-law, Frances Willie, was a longtime member as well. Okay, so we'll get started. Many of the women that belong to BPW made a difference in their community. While mobilizing for World War I, the U.S. government recognized the need for a cohesive group to coordinate identification of women's available skills and experience. A Women's War Council, financed through a federal grant, was established by the War Department to organize the resources of professional women. Throughout the years, three major issues shaped their legislative agenda. BPW Goodwill Tour of Europe initiated the founding of the International BPW Federation with the theme, Better Business Women for a Better Business World. National Business Women's Week was established in 1928 to celebrate and dramatize the contribution of women to the country. In the 1930s, they worked to prohibit legislation or directives denying jobs to married women. At the advent of World War II, they developed a classification system for women with specialized skills, critical to the effort, and supported the formation of women's branches of the armed forces. Immediately following the war, the Women's Pay Act of 1945 was introduced in the U.S. Congress. The National Executive Office relocated from New York to Washington, D.C. as BPW USA became more active in legislative issues. Business and Professional Women's Foundation was incorporated in 1956, creating a branch to provide research, information, career development programs, and scholarships to disadvantaged women, as well as workshops and other training opportunities. The establishment of Status of Women commissions in the U.S. in 1963 was due largely to BPW USA efforts. In the 1970s, they intensified efforts to eliminate discrimination based on sex and marital status in credit, capital, and insurance practices. They tackled comparable worth by calling for newspapers to stop the occupational segregation in classified ads. BPW letters were used to represent better pay for women. Workplace equity issues continued to be their targeted issues. Social Security reform became a front burner issue in 1999. Maquoketa's Business and Professional Women's Club. Educational projects and community service had been the major functions of the Business and Professional Women's Club during its first 7.5 years of existence in Maquoketa. BPW lobbied Congress for passage of the Family and Medical Leave Act, which finally passed in 1993. Lady Barbara Bush addressed BPW members at the White House briefing during the 1990 Lobby Day event. Educational activities of the club had included cooperating in sponsoring relations held in 1933, donating to the public library, establishing a loan fund to aid worthy Maquoketa girls in attending college. This fund was started by the profits of a home talent play held in 1934. The club had observed National Education Week several different years by inviting the junior college girls to hear discussions on vocational guidance. And those are not actually local girls. One of the largest service projects of the group was carried out when the members telephoned nearly every citizen in town to ask for old clothing, and 2 truckloads of wearables were collected. This was then turned over to the relief office. In cooperation with other charitable organizations, baskets had been delivered to needy families at each Christmas. The club began when 15 business and professional women of the town met at the cafe of Mrs. Alice McKinsey. District membership chairman explained the purpose of the organization. Mrs. Bessie Moyle, who had called the group together, was chosen temporary chairman, and the women decided to organize a club. Now, I just talked with Jack Willie this morning, and he said that cafe, because I've been having trouble finding where that was located, but it was where KJ's is now, on West Platte. Alice Myrtle Nims was the daughter of Creon and Harriet Nims. She was a 1917 MHS graduate who married Millard McKinsey in 1921. They were the parents of Dorothy Ann McKinsey and Millard Fay Bud McKinsey Jr. And so those are some advertisements, showing the McKinsey cabin lunch. And then it was at one time called McKinsey Myatt Cabin Lunch. 35 women signed the charter February 11, 1931, and elected officers. Charter members who were still in the club included Peggy Helferich, Armelia Hoffman, Laura Ingalls, Olive Kendall, Louise Mayoffy, Bessie Moyle, Carolyn C. Pendray, Olga Popeller, Edna Romer, Anna Wendell, and Zella Griffin. Eva Sagers was the daughter of Milton and Cecilia Sagers, and later the wife of John Wilcox. She and John were the parents of Anne Wilcox Edelman and Boyd Wilcox. Picture on left is from her 1926 high school yearbook. Picture on right is from her 1928 junior college yearbook. She held the class office of vice president that year. After junior college, Eva was employed at Jackson State Bank. Leah was the daughter of Nathan Henry Blatchley and Opal Gladys Hatfield Blatchley. In high school, Leah was a member of the Glee Club, French Club, Y Club, and was the local editor of The Talk for 1923, the year she graduated. She participated in a play and was on the debate and declamatory team. Olive Lucille Kendall. Raise your hand if you knew Olive. I think she was pretty well known in town. She was born on the Kendall farm on July 4th, 1905, the 11th child in a family of 6 boys and 6 girls, where she lived until her parents retired to a large home at 310 West Platte, where they and Olive lived for the rest of their lives. Olive graduated from Okokota High School in 1922 as valedictorian and worked as a secretary in the office of Frank T. Johnson. At his death in 1950, she continued as a tax accountant, fire casualty insurance agent, and first woman agent for Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company of Milwaukee in the state of Iowa, where she earned many honors, one of which was top woman agent in the company. She was named Home Service Secretary of the Jackson County chapter of the American Red Cross in 1960, and she served as County Director of Iowa Association of Independent Insurance Agents. She was a member and Gold Star sister of American Legion Auxiliary and was American Cancer Society Memorial's chairwoman of Jackson County for 20 years and a member of the State Board of Directors for several years. She was a life member of the Historical Society and a member of the genealogical chapter of Jackson County. Olive's father served as a representative in the General Assembly from 1907 to 1909. Nicknamed Tops, Olive was on the basketball team, was editor-in-chief of The Talk. She also participated in Glee Club, French Club, and Y Club. I love this picture of Olive, because I guess all the years I knew her, I don't remember her smiling, you know, a big smile like that. A college scholarship was established in Olive's name. Shown is Olive's high school picture taken her senior year in 1922. Bessie Maud Brown was the wife of Bud Spurgeon Moyle, who was superintendent of Maquoketa schools. They were the parents of Margaret and Ruth. Bessie, the only child of Wilson Riley Brown and Jane Bond, was born in Kansas. In 1909, she graduated from Tarleton College in Missouri and taught school before her marriage. At the time of her death, at age 53 in 1940, Bessie had been a correspondent in Maquoketa for the Daily Times, a job she had held for over 10 years. In fact, Bessie was a correspondent for 6 newspapers. For several years, she had been a news correspondent and a feature writer, writing for the daily newspapers of eastern Iowa. And some of her feature stories had been used by publishers from coast to coast. Bessie had covered the local murder of Sarah Tracy in 1935, an unsolved murder. Lois Fowler, nicknamed Boots, graduated from MHS in 1925. Lois married Charles Herman Straub, and to this union, son Charles was born. Lois served as the treasurer of BPW. How many of you knew Lois? No? Charles, probably some of you know Charles. And I think he's still living, Charles. Their son, Charles. Okay. Among the 35 charter members were Peggy Helfrich. Peggy was a member of WSCC, Women's Society of Christian Service of the Methodist Church, and served on the Public Affairs Committee for BPW. She had served as secretary for the Red Cross chapter, which helped to provide free swimming lessons and the teaching of first aid. Laura Ingalls was born July 10, 1898 in Dubuque, and died in 1973 in Maquoketa. She was the daughter of Walter and Anna Smola Ingalls. In high school, Laura played basketball and was a member of the Y Club. Her father served on the school board. Laura was the wife of Robert Edmund Hill, Sr. Louise Hilda Martin was the daughter of Charles and Lizzie Martin, natives of England. She married John Mayoffy, and to this union, sons Cecil and Donald were born. Louise is shown with her brother Jack Martin, and I think many of you have heard of Jack Martin. So I made contact with her, either great or great niece, Sherry Moeller, and she gave me quite a bit of information that was pretty fascinating about Louise. For one, she shared this artifact, which is now donated to the museum, and so her shop that she had, this is one of the original bags that a customer would have gotten. So Louise was detained in England during the war while visiting with relatives. So this letter to her mother, and there's more letters as well, appeared in the paper. This one was written August 3rd, 1914. Dear Mother, it is heaps past my usual bedtime, 9:30 p.m. But I shall venture to write a line or two. Seems that everybody is going reckless at this day and age, so I might as well risk another few minutes out of bed. Well, of course you know all about the war, but isn't it terrible? Such excitement I never saw. War, war, war. It's the cry from morning until night, and even at daybreak. We are wakened by people shouting up the street to one another, reports of the night. Today, as you have heard, of course, 13 German vessels were sunk and destroyed. A load of ammunition arrived here today and was taken to the Coast Guard station. Soldiers constantly walking by and using their field glasses. We are looking for our Navy to protect us. And never before did the words of the song, "We've Got a Navy," ring through my ears as they do now. The most serious thing to the inland people now seems to be the food and money question. I'm not worrying myself, as it seems to me we can never starve at 38 Broad Street. Money such as gold and change can't be had. It is a decided fact here in line that I shall be unable to return to America until the war is over, and that it will last until after Christmas. Oh, you know what? I can't seem to... Okay. I didn't even go bathing this AM. As I said, because the tide was so far out, I was afraid I might run into a German fleet that far off from land. Everywhere they are singing, "Rule Britannia" and "God Save the King." Well, I am glad I am safe here, because even I could get a pretty good shot at the Germans from off that wall. August 9th, 1914. Dear Mother, was just about to give up in despair in search for paper when I ran across this. It's like finding a gold brick or something. The services this AM commenced with "God Save the King." I've forgotten if I told you that our girl, Annie Gollop, has 3 brothers in the first 3 boats of the Navy's fleet. And one was on the Umphium, the English cruiser that was sunk Friday. But he was saved. But you can imagine her mother, etc., when they rushed for a paper in the morning and saw the Umphium had been sunk. May 13, 1955. Mrs. Louise Mayoffy, BPW International Chairman, reports that only 2.5 pounds of old, useless stockings will provide one day's work for a widow. Stockings to be donated by local women may be left at the Martin Hat Shop. Louise is shown in the middle of this photo. Shown as part of the 1904 ad for the Martin Hat Shop. The Martin Hat Shop, of which Mrs. Louise Mayoffy is the proprietor, first opened 23 years ago, in the days when milliners trimmed every hat that was sold, and has served the ladies and girls of Maquoketa and community since that time. Mrs. Mayoffy learned the millinery trade at the Rice Brown shop in Maquoketa, beginning as an apprentice when 15 years old. Does anybody know where that building was, the Rice Brown? Have you heard of that? No? You've heard of it, Bonnie?
It's across from the Hearst Hotel, kind of where Goodwill is now, that big building that came down.
Okay. Later she became a trimmer and worked in Maquoketa and various other cities before she opened her shop in Maquoketa. In addition to her hats, Mrs. Mayoffy also carried a line of wash frocks or wash dresses. Raise your hand if you know what a wash dress is. Good for you. Okay. A wash dress is a dress that's washable. It's usually worn as a morning dress while doing housework, and for summer outings when a dress might get soiled. It's either made of cotton, linen, or silk. This is a quilt that Louise helped make during the Depression with scraps of velvet from hats. No one was able to afford the luxury of a beautiful hat during those times. This quilt is now owned by her great-niece. Mrs. Elizabeth Longervan, left high school commercial teacher, has for the past 30 years purchased fashionable chapeaus from Maquoketa's Lily Batch. Mrs. Mayoffy, owner and proprietor of the Martin Hat Shop. This year's Easter bonnet may well be their final transaction. Very soon now, Mrs. Mayoffy, a milliner for 42 years, will retire and move to Compton, California, where her sons and families reside. Carolyn C. Pendray was a legislator for 4 terms. She was the first woman to serve in the Iowa legislature, and at the time of her death was the only woman to serve in both the House and Senate. Carolyn supported bills which promoted the equality of women, particularly those regarding education, inheritance law, and property reform. She was considered a strong, resolute woman who rarely gave up a fight. Previously, she had taught in rural schools and was superintendent of schools for Henry County. Carolyn had also been a Maquoketa merchant. And Roger, you told a little story about this woman at one of our brown bag lunches, so you're familiar with her. Olga Popeller was born about 1899 to Estella von Etchen and John Popeller. In 1940, she was living with her father and brother Harold. After graduating from MHS in 1918, she became a teacher. Carrie Edna Romer was born in 1887 to Carl and Caroline Drum Romer. She married Paul Henneke, and to this union, 4 children were born: Lenore Marie, Robert Henry, Mildred, and Kieldred Henneke. Mary Ann Margaret Wendell, raise your hand if you knew Mary Ann. I would think there'd be a lot of people. Okay. Was the daughter of Barney and Mary Glesner Greger. She graduated from MHS in 1945 and married James Jim Wendell. They were the parents of Chuck and Jamie. Mary Ann had worked as a bookkeeper for JCPH and was office manager for the Nissen Cabin Agency and the Maquoketa Veterinarian Club. She served a term on the board of directors at the country club. Zella Griffin was born in 1906 to Harry and Nora Nims Griffin. She graduated from MHS. I think she was maybe in the class of 1924. Nickname Dot, Zella was the class treasurer in 1920, secretary treasurer in 1921, vice president in 1924. She was also president of Normal Training Club and vice president of the Home Econ Club. She completed 3 years of college and was a teacher before her marriage. Zella married Harold Artemus Mitchell in 1944, and to this union, daughter Carolyn Sue Mitchell was born. The National Federation was organized in St. Louis in 1919. At the close of the World War, the United States government requested that such a group be organized as a tribute to the fine work women did during the months of conflict. The YWCA formed the nucleus for this organization, which then became the Business and Professional Women's Clubs. Among the purposes of the local and national organization were the following: to elevate the standards of women in business and professions, to promote cooperation among women, to extend educational opportunity so that each business girl may have at least a high school education, and to promote the interests of business and professional women. Members of the local group had profited particularly from discussions of economic and social problems of the day, and from contact with outstanding women from all parts of the state and nation. State honors had been won by the local club, as the State Publicity Prize came to Maquoketa for 4 consecutive years. State and national officers had visited Maquoketa numerous times. Shown are past club presidents. Mary Catherine McGinn was born in Lost Nation in 1914, the daughter of William and Honora Foley McGinn. She married Claude Edward Townsend in 1943, and to this union 6 children were born. Mary died in Bettendorf in 2005. Officers who were installed May 1938 were Margaret Joles, President, Eleanor Goodall, Vice President, Armella Hoffman, Recording Secretary, Beatrice Sharp, Corresponding Secretary, and Minnie Hegstrom, Treasurer. There were now 38 members. Armella Hoffman was born about 1910 and was living at home with her parents, Peter and Caroline Hoffman, and her sister Ruth, when she was 30. They lived at 208 East Maple Street, shown in the picture. Margaret Celeste Joles was born November 16, 1912. How many knew Margaret? She lived with her parents, Ludi and Deward, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, Joel's, and later with her sisters, Wilma and Florence. She was a veteran, and I'm not sure, does anyone know what branch she served in? Okay. Beatrice Beldana Sharp was born January 9, 1897 in Maquoketa to Rufus and Elena Jane Shrigley Sharp. Senior picture shown of Beatrice was taken in 1915. The quote below her picture read, "What more can I do to help someone be happier?" She was a member of the Y Club, Glee Club, and Sextet. Beatrice was a school teacher and lived with her parents. Minnie Becker was born February 2nd, 1980 in Maquoketa to George and Emma Pink Becker. She married Joseph Hegstrom in 1919 in Davenport. Census records show she attended school through 8th grade. Minnie worked as a seamstress, and this is where she had lived, the present-day home of where Minnie had lived. BPW officers installed in 1952, left to right, Mary E. Joyner, corresponding secretary, Dorothy Kaufman, vice president, Leela Cook, treasurer, Joy Lancaster, president, Madge Latzbite, secretary, and Vera Wild, trustee of the Educational Loan Fund. In 1954, Carol Regenweather was the chairman of the Evening on Education and Vocations. Carol had attended Iowa University. She was a clerk for 16 years in the office of Maquoketa City Manager and was a dispatcher for the Maquoketa Police Department. Earlier, she had worked at Gamble's store and was assistant principal and high school principal at Whitmore and Preston schools. She married Leroy Schrader in 1924 in Fayette. He died in 1945. And Carol married Sylvester Regenweather in 1952. Carol was a charter member of First Lutheran Church and was a member of the Mothers Club and Daughters of the American Revolution. Carol was the mother of 3 children, one being Asher Schrader. January 28, 1971. Phoebe Keck addresses the recent dinner meeting of the BPW women, which was held at the 64 Drive-In Banquet Room. I didn't realize it had a banquet room there. Mrs. Keck, who was a board member in the recently formed organization called Maquoketa Coordinating Committee on Drug Abuse, had given some 15 to 20 talks in the area, acquainting people with the drug problem. So far, she had reached men, women, rural and urban, as well as students at both the junior and senior high level. Her interest in the drug abuse problem developed out of a program she was assigned called Can You Trust Anyone Over 35? In giving her program, she explained the source and medical use of various drugs. She told the effects of drug use as well as the symptoms to watch when suspecting drug use within your family. And that was Carolyn Keck's mother, Phoebe. 1979, members of the Maquoketa chapter who were appointed to state and district offices at the state convention in Des Moines were Ruth Kleiss, who was appointed to state and district offices, Connie Cressy, district secretary, treasurer, and Pearl Stahl, district director for District 2. Pearl was the mother of Joan Wentworth. Other members of the BPW club before the 1980s were Mrs. Eula Keeley. Eula was born in Nashville in 1935 and was the daughter of Hans William Bud Ulysses Moore and married Catherine Franzen Moore. She married Robert Foraker Keeley in 1955 in Missouri. While living in Maquoketa, Eula was the owner of L'Amour Beauty Salon, which is where Jack and Marilyn Willie had worked at one time. After her marriage, she and Bob moved to Branson and bought 2 motels, which Eula ran while raising her children. One was the Travelers Motel, and the other was called Jesse James. Later, they built a home in Montana. Her granddaughter, Nicole Olson, said Eula loved to read and was an excellent cook. Nicole would visit during the summers and help her grandma clean the rooms. Nicole had this measuring cup on display at her business, so when I asked her by her grandma, and she said, here, I got this. And so she has the Business Solutions located in Maquoketa. Eula died in Arizona in 2010, and she has 2 cemetery stones. She has one at Pence, where she's buried with her daughter, Ann Keeley, and then there's another stone with her name on it at Mount Hope. Marshalline Lamborn. Now, most of you probably knew Marshalline. No? Okay. Was born in 1921, the daughter of Glenn and Ethel Shady Davis. She graduated from Maquoketa's junior college and taught in country schools. Marshalline married Cliff Lamborn in 1942. Cliff served 10 years in the state senate. In 1979, Marshalline was the first woman to be elected to the Jackson County Board of Supervisors. Mrs. Lamborn served as a board member for Jackson County Public Hospital and the Jackson County Historical Society. She was a lifelong Republican and served many years on the Central Committee. She and Cliff were the parents of Janet Lamborn Parmenter. Eva Mae Saunders. Raise your hand if she was your teacher. Longtime member, had served as president for 2 years. She was married to Earl Saunders and had taught math at the middle school. She and Earl were the parents of Ralph and Joan. Eva Mae submitted a pork chop recipe for the BPW cookbook. Luella A. Wells was born in 1917 in Fulton, Iowa, to Ernest A. Teeters and Ida E. Croce Teeters. She was an MHS graduate. Now this was your aunt. This is Bonnie's aunt. Luella married William E. Wells in 1940. William and Luella were the parents of Sherry Jo Wells Hicks Reed, Richard Wells, and Melody Wells Witt. Mrs. Wells worked as a bookkeeper all her life. She had been a member of the Rebecca Lodge. Listed are BPW members from the 1980s. So those that I know that are still living, Kay Scott Lindstrom Hine, Lornae Spalding, Connie Francis, who's here today, Linda Bodenhofer, Connie Cressy, Bonnie Palmer, Mary Kay Flanker, Karen Dag-Bentrott, Brenda Beck, Jane Dims, and of course myself. Connie Cressy, Connie Drum, married John Edward Cressy in 1959 in Maquoketa. They operated John E. Cressy Construction, and in 1990, Cressy and Associates was formed. John and his crew were the ones that did the amazing addition to the public library. They were the parents, are the parents of Brian and Luann. Bonnie Palmer, she met her future husband, Gene, on a blind double date. And they were married in 1947. To this union, 6 children were born. And Jack is one of them, and he's a member of the Historical Society. Her husband was born in Iron Hill. He learned the electrical trade and helped wire farms and houses as part of the New Deal. In 2005, he was honored for the role in his liberation of Dachau concentration camp at the end of the war. You know, and I knew this man all the way growing up and never knew this, you know, about him. Didn't talk about it. Mary Kay Hayward Flanker. Mary Kay Flanker lives in Maquoketa and is the mother of 2 sons. Her husband Roger ran Woody's Conoco for many years. And Lornae Spalding was a high school family consumer science teacher for many years. She was married to Scott Spalding, and they were the parents of 2 daughters. Connie, did you want to add anything? No. Okay. Maxine Shad Campbell. Maxine was born in 1922 and a 1940 MHS graduate. She married Lawrence Campbell in 1941. They were the parents of Jeannie, Mrs. Doug Owen, Larry, and Stephen Campbell. Maxine and her husband had owned and operated Campbell Cleanup Service in Maquoketa since 1951, which, you know, had gotten sold, I think, in later years. Ruth DeGraw was born in 1917 in Creston, Iowa. Anybody have her for a teacher, Ruth? She was a teacher for 32 years in Baldwin and Maquoketa. She taught high school English and French, as noted in her obituary, but I'm just sure she was my middle school English teacher as well. And she was a great teacher. She was very cheery. She married Harold Kleiss in Grant City, Missouri in 1941. They were the parents of Beverly and Keith. After Harold's death, Ruth married Wilfred DeGraw and was widowed again 3 years later. Eloise Evans, who knew her? Eloise? Was born August 17, 1924 in Maquoketa. She died November 10, 1997. Eloise was the daughter of Nola and Claude Stratton Evans. She was a graduate of Jane Lamb Hospital School of Nursing at Clinton and joined the hospital staff at the time of their opening in May 1950. Prior to her serving as medical surgical supervisor, she was a medical surgical nurse. Grace Houlihan. I had such a time finding a picture of her, which is kind of surprising because she was once the curator here. Grace Urella Wilson was born in South Fork Township, Jackson County, Iowa, in 1904, the daughter of Volney Wilson and Elizabeth Higgins Wilson. Her father was also born in South Fork, and her paternal grandfather was a native of Canada. Grace married Thomas Houlihan in 1943 in Denver. He passed away 4 years later, and I don't believe she ever remarried. Joyce Jurgensen Hurley. Joyce was the daughter of Ben and Naomi Jurgensen. She first lived in Miles and later a clerk at the Deputy Variety Store in Monticello. Photos shown is from a Monticello yearbook where a group photo was taken, the Girls Athletic Association. And I'm pretty sure this was her, but then I think, it was Monticello, so maybe this is another Joyce. And so this Joyce was a cheerleader as shown in the photo. Betty Jetter. Who knew Betty? Elizabeth Marie Betty Mills was born in Muscatine County in 1921 to Emery and Venus Jetter. Betty was widowed in 1968 and married Delbert John Jetter in 1970 in Maquoketa. She was employed as a secretary at Schrader and Ayler's law office in Maquoketa and was part owner and managed Nissen Cleaners with her first husband, Harold. Betty also worked for many years at Maquoketa State Bank. Betty died in 1999 and left more than $750,000 to 5 community groups. Those groups included the Maquoketa Area Foundation, Jackson County Historical Society, DAC, Public Library, and the United Methodist Church. Helen Kinraid. Helen was born March 15, 1925, at her home in Lost Nation to Elwyn and Clella Galloway Hookelman. She graduated from Elwood High School, class of 1942. On April 14, 1943, she married Robert Bob Kinraid. They were married for 40 years until Bob's death. They were the parents of 4 children. She and her husband operated the Kinraid Feed and Supply Company and then Accent Homes of DeWitt. Helen volunteered at the hospital, Meals on Wheels. She was a member of the American Legion Ladies Auxiliary and Hospice Auxiliary. Margaret McCarthy. A lot of people would know Margaret. Yeah. Margaret Ellen Walker was born in a farmhouse north of Iron Hill, the youngest child of Elaine and David Walker. Margaret attended Maquoketa High School, and she was the homecoming queen in 1959. She began working at Jackson State Bank in 1963 and married Joe McCarthy a few years later. She served on the Jackson County Fair Board, Executive Board of the Maquoketa Country Club for several years, and she volunteered at the Hurstville Interpretive Center and Sacred Heart, and also at Sacred Heart School in the capacity of librarian. Margaret M. Margie Nelson. Who knew her? Born in 1936 to Henry and Mary Schollenberger Nelson in Domer. She was employed with Clinton Engines, Maquoketa State Bank, Colonial Square, the Domer School, and in later years, she worked as a caregiver. Lorraine Owen.
She's my neighbor.
Your neighbor. Okay. And I think she's one of the ladies that got me to join this group. Lorraine Lolita Bush was born in Nashville in 1926 to Gerhard and Bertha Tam Bush. She married Harold Owen in 1945 in North Carolina, while George was stationed in the Navy. One son, Douglas Wayne Owen, was born to this union. Doug is married to Maxine Campbell's daughter, Jeannie. Lorraine had worked as a secretary at Clinton Engine. She belonged to the American Legion Ladies Auxiliary and Watanya Club. She was also active with Owen's Laundromat, located on East Platte, and it's where Shirley Brandon used to live until the storm came along and did some damage. She had to move out of that building, so it's now an apartment building. So Lorraine Owen submitted a dessert recipe named Striped Delight for the BPW cookbook. So I recently found this program that Lorraine had saved, and how I found it was, it turns out we have her desk, her old Clinton Engine desk, when we were getting rid of some of my father-in-law's items. So I found this. It was kind of tucked in the back behind a drawer, and it must have fallen. But so this was, I just thought this was kind of, it was kind of in bad shape actually to bring, but this is what we had at every program, and I think we met once a month. We had these little programs, and we literally cut and pasted things out on them. So this was for the District 2 fall meeting held at the Maquoketa Country Club in 1980. And it was titled, Equality, a Dream Come True. The blessing was given by Ruth Kleiss. Brenda Stoll was president. Mayor Howard Elkins gave the greeting. And there was a notes section in the back of the program where she had noted how many members that other communities had. So again, Amosa had 37, and Clinton was 37, and Davenport had quite a few, but Maquoketa had 51. That was pretty good for that time. Mary Schreiber, who knew her? Mary Elda Watto was born in 1922 in rural Andrew. She married Carl Schreiber in 1941 in Rock Island, and they farmed in the Andrew area. She was employed as an insurance agent and an auditor at Merchants National Bank, Cedar Rapids, financial and aid director at the University of Dubuque, a clerk at the Jackson County Treasurer's Office, and an Iowa State revenue agent. Her daughter, Eileen Shirk, survived her. Joan is married with her family. She's in the back row on the right. Gertrude Wiersma. Who knew Gertrude? Gertrude M. Easton was born to Dale and Martha Lemkuhl Easton. She was a graduate of Maquoketa Community High School. She married Harry Wiersma in 1949 in Yankton, South Dakota. Gertrude had worked at the former Jackson State Bank in Maquoketa as a teller and customer service representative from 1947 until 1987, 4 years. She and her husband's children were John and Sherry. Gertrude Wiersma submitted a barbecue ribs recipe for the BPW cookbook. Galetha Winship, who knew Galetha? She passed away at age 95. Galetha Lucille Hugh was born March 24, 1921 in Fulton, Iowa, to Roy and Norma Mae Shields Hoot. She was a 1938 graduate of Maquoketa High School. She married Robert Parker in 1940 in Maquoketa, and to this union 2 children were born, Karen and Bob. She later married Marvin Winship. Galetha had first worked for the deputy clerk at the courthouse. In 1958, she became the executive secretary for Clinton Engines. She was a member of the American Legion Ladies Auxiliary, Jackson County Historical Society, and the Red Hat Society. In 1988, Maquoketa's sesquicentennial BPW cookbook was published. Forgot to bring it. Larry Hager designed the logo. His wife Alice was an elementary teacher for many years at Cardinal. We met at Leona Brock's home. Leona and her husband Glenn owned Brock Lumber Company for many years. Their son, Carrie, later managed the business, and Carrie is Angie's father. The reason why we had it there, it was kind of like they had two houses. There was this big room attached. It seemed like it was as big as this room that we're in right now. And so we could just leave all of our stuff scattered out while we worked on that book for that whole year. And I mean, no one else had a house that big. So that was really, really nice for her to offer up her home for that. And she lived, I've got a picture of that present day home now, but it's kind of north on 62 a ways, just a short ways. I'm not sure who lives there now. The book included a page with a big thank you to all who helped. Grace Houlihan helped with the history part, including a brief history of Maquoketa and Jackson County, and she compiled the historic photographs. Showing us the recipe she submitted for beef summer sausage. Next are the historic photos found in the cookbook, and many of these you've seen before, the Main Street looking north, and that's from 1985. Main Street in the early 1900s looking north. Main Street looking south, 1900s. Old Emerson Hotel, 1914. And this is no longer standing. The United Church of Christ parking lot is there now.
That was the YMCA. Yeah, it was the YMCA.
Yeah.
Was it the YMCA?
Yeah, it's on the side of the.
Says it on there.
But
It was the Emerson Hotel after the
Oh.
first.
okay.
It was both of those things.
It was both of those? Okay. NIMS excursion boat on the Maquoketa River. Lakehurst Dam and Supper Club from the 1930s. Old Courthouse, 1870. Smith Packing Plant at Horseshoe Pond in the early 1900s. Nickerson's Farm Machinery was in the 100 block of East Pleasant. So where was that? Does anyone know? Where was that? Was that where our parking lot is? I mean, is that across from the dentist? Across from, no.
Wouldn't it be across from the new city hall?
Oh, you think it's there, the 100 block?
It'd be in that corner,
Okay.
intersection.
Oh, yeah, because ours would be west. Yeah, ours would be west. Okay.
So two options there, yeah.
Maquoketa's Main Street, 1920s, looking north. How are we doing for time? I can't, the clock isn't working.
It's 12:56.
Okay. Old Clock Tower in 1909. On Platt Street looking west. Hurstville Lime Kilns. And of course they're kind of covered there by the building in front. Rural Mail Carrier at Bridgeport Bridge. And that's how they spelled it in the book. Bridgeport was two words, bridge and port. So I'm not sure at some time we put it together or if that was wrong. East side of South Olive Street, 100 block, taken in 1914. Recipes were submitted by members and non-members alike. The most unusual recipe was submitted by Lorraine Starman. Who knew Lorraine? Lorraine was a hairdresser for many years and was the wife of Tony Starman, and I believe she had a daughter and a son. Lorraine's recipe was titled Panis or Scrabble. Ingredients called for 2 pounds of lean, bony pork. She noted, my mother used the clean head of a pig. Yeah.
Yeah.
Way back when recipes. Sawdust City Cake, 1872, submitted by Ruth Speck. Grandmother's Molasses Cookies, submitted by Bertha Taylor. And I've talked about Bertha before. She and her husband had a plumbing business, among other things. Sour Cream Prune Pie was submitted by Leona Brock. Angie, have you ever eaten that?
No, I might have to make
You
it.
think? Okay, I've got the recipe. I can get that to you.
Half a piece.
Maxine Campbell shared her Jello tomato jelly recipe. And Aunt Annie's Featherlight Nut Cake was submitted by Vivian Franzen. Mrs. Betty Miller, Mrs. Richard Miller, shared her butterscotch apples recipe. Pepper Nuts recipe was received from Tressa Bickford. Mrs. Cottrell's 1936 Christmas cookies from Bernice Schumann. Mrs. Wilford Miller's recipe for hot water sponge cake from 1924. Inez Ellsbury, Old Cake, 1932. Frances Willie, Jack's mom, shared her peanut brittle recipe, and she was a longtime member. I just talked with Jack about that this morning. I wasn't sure if she was a member or just submitted a recipe, but she was a member. Frances was a tremendous cook. Her career started with the Mackenzie Cabin Lunch, then the Hi-Ho. She also was the Decker House cook when it was managed by Trudy and Iva Smith, and cooked for Jim Marcusi at the Village Blacksmith. The majority of her career was spent as a cook for George Pateras at the Green Mill Cafe. Lastly, she opened Frances's Kitchen at the Macocoto Livestock Building located on Pershing Road. And so somebody said, oh, that, when I was typing some of this into the program, was it Shirley said, oh, that's why Jack's such a good cook. So,
Look at her hair. Her hair's perfect.
okay, so just to be clear, these recipes that are in the book are really not mine. My name is beside them. So it was kind of a misunderstanding. I was on the committee. I'd never did this kind of thing before. Didn't really know how to cook. And they said, we needed recipes. So I gathered recipes. I didn't know they were like supposed to be yours. And so yeah, it's a light punch for 50 really as a 20-something, when I've ever did that. Or the hot battered rum. And so I didn't really figure this out until like, a few years later, and Pat Decker, we were in Fairway, and she came up to me and said, oh, I just love that your enchilada recipe. And it's like, I thought I've never made enchiladas before. So like, and different other people were coming up to me and had used these recipes. I've never made any of them. Yeah. And so I don't really honestly know where I got them. I don't even think they were my mom's. So this is the BPW prayer, and I typed it, and I switched the words around, and maybe Connie can tell me, if I don't have that right. But do you want to read this together? It's kind of a cool prayer. Keep us, O God, from pettiness. Let us be large in thought, in word, in deed. Let us be done with fault-finding and leave off self-seeking. May we put away all pretense and meet each other face to face, without self-pity and without prejudice. May we never be hasty in judgment and always generous. Let us take time for all things. Make us to grow calm, serene, gentle. Teach us to put into action our better impulses, straightforward and unafraid. Grant that we may realize it is the little things that create differences, that in the big things of life we are as one. And may we strive to touch and to know the great common human heart of us all. And oh, Lord God, let us not forget. Yeah, and I think it was actually supposed to be let us forget not to be kind. Do you remember, Connie? Because I changed that. I thought Mary Stewart, this author who from 1910 signed the collect with her pen name Mary Stewart, remained involved in BPW until her death in 1943. Does anyone have any questions or like to share anything? Okay, thank you.